Good evening, listeners, brave navigators of the enigmatic and the concealed. Have you ever felt the pull of the unanswered, the allure of the mysteries that shroud our existence? For more than a decade, a unique comic publisher has dared to dive into these mysteries, unafraid of the secrets they might uncover. This audacious entity is Paranoid American. Welcome to the mystifying universe of the Paranoid American podcast.
Launched in the year 2012, Paranoid American has been on a mission to decipher the encrypted secrets of our world. From the unnerving enigma of MK Ultra mind control to the clandestine assemblies of secret societies. From the awe-inspiring frontiers of forbidden technology to the arcane patterns of occult symbols in our very own pop culture. They have committed to unveiling the concealed realities that lie just beneath the surface. Join us as we navigate these intricate landscapes, decoding the hidden scripts of our society and challenging the accepted perceptions of reality.
Folks, I've got a big problem on my hands. There's a company called Paranoid American making all these funny memes and comics. Now, I'm a fair guy. I believe in free speech as long as it doesn't cross the line. And if these AI-generated memes dare to make fun of me, they're crossing the line.
This is your expedition into the realm of the extraordinary, the secret, the shrouded. Come with us as we sift through the world's grand mysteries, question the standardized narratives, and brave the cryptic labyrinth of the concealed truth. So strap yourselves in, broaden your horizons, and steel yourselves for a voyage into the enigmatic heart of the Paranoid American podcast, where each story, every image, every revelation brings us one step closer to the elusive truth.
Okay, welcome to a very interesting and exciting, hopefully, because we're going to compare some crazy notes today. Shout out to Lobster and Raven from Nephilim Death Squad for putting me on to Jerry Marzinsky. And I just want to give you a little preview of what Jerry's about before I bring him in here. So Jerry's a retired licensed psychotherapist. He's got over 40 years of experience. He's worked and he's studied the thought process specifically of psychotic and criminally insane patients in some of the most volatile psychiatric institutions in the entire nation. He's a commercial pilot. He's a certified scuba diver. He's does long distance motorcycling. He's held positions of second lieutenant in the Arizona, I think, Civil Air Patrol. And he was an assistant scoutmaster. He's got awards. He's got Pigma College Apple Award, Meritus Service Award for teaching abnormal psychology. He's got formal training. He's got a BA in psychology from Temple University, a master's degree from University of Georgia. He's got a PhD in a psychology program, co-author of an amazing journey into the psychotic mind, and a whole bunch of other materials. And let me just bring Jerry in to fill in any gaps and tell everyone where they can find you, first of all, because I'm ready to jump in.
Well, they can find me at my website at jerrymarzinsky.com. Marzinsky, or they could write me at JMARZ and the number 1 at outlook.com.
And as usual, we'll have links in the description and everything. So welcome aboard. I want to just preface this with, I came across your work when I was talking about some weird fringe research that I was doing into schizophrenia, specifically dementia praecox, as it was kind of called at the turn of the 19th century, as we went into like the late 1800s and the early 1900s. That's what captured my focus, and we'll get into that first. But from what I understood through, I think, Lobster and Raven, I don't know if you remember these two crazy guys on a show called Nephilim Death Squad, but they had you on and you were talking about schizophrenia not as something that can be defined inside the medical or the academic Rockefeller realm, but that it's actual demon possession. And how much of that is correct? Like, am I overstating that? Am I misconstruing any of that? Or let me let you put it into your own words in that particular context.
Well, I did find, and I denied this for years. I mean, even after the evidence was overwhelming, I didn't want to see those voices that schizophrenics heard as demons or evil spirits. I mean, I thought it was something to do with their subconscious mind. But the evidence just kept building and building and building, and I just kept denying it, denying. Um, and what I was doing was trying to figure out what these things were. And the schizophrenics I was working with, they were just as interested in what they were as I was. And a number of them would ask, who are you? What are you? And they would respond, we are you. So they want them to think that those voices they're hearing belong to them. Very dangerous belief.
For some background, did you grow up heavily religious?
No.
So what was growing up like in terms of religion? Like non-existent, just for show? What?
As soon as you asked that, I had the image pop into my mind. Okay, so I was in the Boy Scouts. I was going for the star rank, and I met all the requirements, including memorizing the entire Morse code, which was a requirement at the time. So
you still remember it?
No.
Okay.
And I submitted all this stuff to the scoutmaster and said, "Okay, I'm done all my stuff." And apparently, my dad snuck behind my back and said, "Hey, well, listen, he's not religious. He doesn't go to church much," and it's completely hypocritical because my dad didn't either. So my scoutmaster comes back and goes, I can't give you this rank because you're not reverent. You don't go to church. And I said, okay, how long do I have to go to church for? He said 6 months. So I went to church for 6 months, the nearest church I could walk to because I didn't have a car at the time.
Just once on Sundays?
Well, yeah, on Sundays, went to Bible school, the whatever that was. So for 6 months I did that. And during that time, I didn't learn anything that I thought was earth shaking. We built things, and I noticed that the preacher was having a affair with one of the parishioners. So I come out of there having done my 6 months, and got the note from the preacher. Okay, he was there for 6 months. Scoutmaster called the preacher and went, yeah, he showed up, but he didn't set the world on fire. He showed up. The scoutmaster pulls me in again. I said, okay, I did what I promised to do. And he said, no, I'm not going to give it to you because the preacher said you weren't reverent enough. You weren't paying a lot of attention. And I went, hey, I kept my part of the deal. He said, I'm not giving it to you. And I said, well, then I quit. Take your scouts and shove it. And I quit. And it was like 2 decades later, he finally gave me that star rank. But that held me back from religion for a good 20, 25 years. I mean, I believed in God.
Did you believe
I prayed
in demons?
every once in a while. No.
Okay. When did you start believing in demons then? Because this is at least 20, 30 years, right?
Yeah. I'd heard of them. I heard of evil spirits. I started believing them when I started seeing them through these patients, through the schizophrenics. What the psychiatric mafia says in all their books, it's psychology, the PhD program, the DSM, that diagnostic classification manual, that's the Bible for psychology and psychiatry. They just say, oh, well, they're auditory hallucinations. They're hallucinations. They made it sound like they were word salad. Just schizophrenics were hearing a bunch of garbage, and talking and responding to garbage. And that's not what I saw. Okay. After I finished a master's degree, I went to work in one of the biggest psychiatric hospitals on the planet, Central State Hospital in Milledgeville, Georgia. The time I got there were like 10,000 patients in that place. It sprawled over 300 acres. There were close to over 150 buildings there. It was massive. It was the size of a city. And it was in the middle of, this was back in the late 70s.
Okay.
The place has since been closed down.
Tail end of MK Ultra, sounds like.
Well, I know of MK Ultra, but I didn't notice any of their. Now they were experimenting with psych patients. I knew that. I never did see it, but they were giving, what was it, 3,000 shock treatments a year at that place, and those were brutal. I mean, I watched one.
Electroshock and electroconvulsive therapy.
Yep. I watched one. I almost fainted. I walked out of there, and I got a pretty strong stomach, but boy, I staggered out of watching that, and that was doing brain damage. Even one shock treatment, neurologists can see the damage done to the brain.
So I got a question on this one in particular, and this blows my mind because I've seen contemporary psychiatrists still advocating for benefits of electroconvulsive therapy, even like right now in 2024. But it's always seemed like a very blunt instrument. Like, even if it had the potential to do anything, is there a way that you can like pinpoint a certain part of the brain, or is it you're just shocking someone with electricity and just hoping it, right?
They just run it from one side of your head to the other.
Okay. So this is percussive therapy. It's just like hitting someone and hoping that one of those hits jostles the right thing in the plate. Okay.
But one thing I did notice, it was interesting. Okay, it did ameliorate major depression for a short while. It did drive out the voices schizophrenics were hearing for a short while, from days to weeks. Back
to a normal baseline?
No, but much better. Much better. So I imagine that's why they kept using it, but it didn't cure anything. It didn't cure the depression. It didn't cure the schizophrenia. But electricity is energy. The voices, these voices are energy. There is no time, there is no space, there is no matter in the universe where they live in. They're energetic beings. Now, I didn't know what they were at the time, but one of the first things I saw when I went to work at this giant state hospital, which for me, I'm an adrenaline junkie also, so that helped a lot. That helped a whole lot. And one of the first things I noticed was that these voices were affecting the schizophrenics, and they were affecting them negatively. If they were listening to them, they would do stupid stuff. They would do dangerous stuff. They would insult people. They would fight with people. They would quit going to their classes. There was a link between their self-destructive behavior and listening to these voices. The other thing I saw was that, for the most part, those psychiatric drugs that the psychiatrists were giving these patients didn't get rid of the voices. They just numbed the patient, so they didn't care as much about them. They were like major tranquilizers. They may have weakened the intensity of the voices, but they didn't get rid of them. Right? So that was interesting, because what they were actually doing was hitting a energetic entity with a physical drug. The two don't match. They don't match. So basically, it was like, if you get a big magnet with a magnetic field, you can't see it, hear it, feel it, smell it. Your senses will not pick up that magnetic field. For all practical purposes, if you didn't know it was there, you wouldn't know it. Now, you get a bottle of iron filings, you put it on that magnetic field, and now you can see a pattern to it. You can see it. So I've been studying those voices for 30 years, maybe more, and they run very specific, repeatable patterns. And those patterns are their operational definition. And they're on my website at jerrymarzinsky.com. So any of you working with schizophrenics or have schizophrenics family, you can go look at these patterns and see for yourself. It's not like what the psychiatric mafia did, is like, oh, it's genetic. Schizophrenia is due to some genetic abnormality. They got away with that for a decade and a half before some geneticists proved that there was no genetic link to schizophrenia. They needed something to sell their drugs. They didn't know why those drugs worked. So they just made stuff up. So the genetic theory went down the tubes, and they pushed it for a long time. So they didn't have anything to explain, why their drugs worked or what schizophrenia was. They didn't know what it was. If they were to tell you the truth, they had no idea what caused it. And, very few of the psychiatrists I talked to and asked, well, what causes this, would actually say, well, we don't know. The rest would say, oh, it's a chemical imbalance of the brain. That's what I was taught when I was in graduate school. It's a chemical imbalance of the brain.
On that, so my understanding with my Rockefeller education basically is my only real entry point into any of this, is that schizophrenia, dementia, Alzheimer's, these are all kind of classified in the same area that dementia praecox used to be, as like this all-encompassing term. But like, is schizophrenia and Parkinson's, are those completely different things? Or is this all in one bucket?
No, they're different things. So it went from dementia praecox to schizophrenia, which means split mind. And that's the closest they ever got to finding the truth out about what schizophrenia is.
Now, is this dissociative identity disorder, DID, or is that separate from schizophrenia?
That's separate.
So that's probably the most important thing to help understand is what's the difference between schizophrenia and dissociative identity disorder?
Well, this is, okay. Schizophrenia is they hear these voices. It sounds just like their own voice. The thousands of thoughts you hear you're going through your head every day. It sounds just like that for the most part. There is no, we are the voices, or we're evil spirits, or anything like that.
Okay.
But what they do is they inject into your thought stream negative ideas and thoughts about yourself and other people. They're never positive thoughts. They're always negative. You're no good. You're rotten. You're evil. Nobody likes you. You're worthless. You're stupid. You're ugly. I mean, every negative pejorative that you can think of, they put into your thought stream. Now, people don't realize that thoughts come from outside of themselves because they experience the thought as inside their head. So they think, well, it's my thought because I hear it inside my head, so it must belong to me.
Right. Like a speaker owns every music ever played because it came through itself, right. Almost.
Yeah. So but the brain is like a receiver. It picks up different frequencies. Okay? The signals outside that radio. So if you brought a radio,
sorry,
back
could you repeat that? Right as you were talking about signals and radio, you broke up.
Yeah. Well, if there's no interference during one of these broadcasts, something's wrong.
Yeah.
I always get interference during these things.
Yeah, hi, NSA. So, we see you.
So the brain is like a radio receiver. It receives thoughts. It's tuned to a specific frequency. The frequency is high or low. Depends on how you were raised for the most part. Yeah. And trauma also affects the frequency of that radio. Okay. So because we experience thoughts as coming from inside our heads, we think they belong to us. So if you took a radio back 200 years, you turned it on, everybody would be freaked out. Like, how did those people get in there? How'd they get all those instruments in there? How did they all fit in there? There's a bunch of them in there. How'd they get in there? So they take the radio apart and they look in there. They don't see any people in there. Well, where are the people? Same thing with your brain. Nobody's done an autopsy on the brain and found a thought or a voice or an entity. Right?
Are there certain people that have better radios than others? Like let's say that you take an example of like some gene. Let's say, I don't know, Stephen Hawking, or fill in the gap, because I don't want to like show like, because you can be like, oh, Stephen Hawking was a fraud. So fill in the gap with someone that you think was like a genius scientist or inventor or something. Like, are they just smart because the thought happens to go into their head versus the guy across the street? Or do they have to have like a pretty badass radio in order to hear certain thoughts?
Well, yeah, they'll See, Tesla, even he admitted that he got most of his ideas in dreams.
Right.
They came from outside of him, and he just put them to use. Okay. Now there does have to be a certain amount of logic and mathematics. I hate mathematics. I'm on the other
Amen.
side of the
Yeah, screw
I'm on
math.
the other side of the spectrum. But
I say we
try.
cancel math.
But all my friends are engineers. They're electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, that kind. And I can understand what they're saying, but they can't relate to what I'm experiencing, what I go through, or what my world is like. They can't get it because they're kind of stuck in that rationality. Now, imagine Emanuel Swedenborg talks about that also. So you got to have a badass radio, and you can't be screwed up because you have to be able to concentrate.
Is it possible? Is it possible if you had someone that had a good upbringing, that they did everything right and they still get schizophrenia? Like, what happened in that kind of a scenario?
Well, they could have been playing with Ouija boards. They could have been contacting. Ouija boards are very dangerous. They're not toys. I've talked to a number of schizophrenics who started off using Ouija boards, and the voice went from that little thing they push around on the board to showing up in their head. And
have you noticed a pattern between people that use them by themselves versus people that use them in groups?
No. What they do start hearing is individually. So I've never heard of a mass number of them all hearing them at the same time.
Well, the reason I ask is because one of the so to speak, rules of Ouija boards is that you're never supposed to use one by yourself. You're always supposed to use it with somebody else. And I think that it's supposed to be like a level of protection. But since it's a board game and it's a toy for children marketed as such, people don't usually, you look at the rules and just think like, oh, haha, that's so fun. But I just wonder if there's actually something to that. If somebody plays with a Ouija board by themselves, if there would be a higher instance rate of becoming schizophrenic versus ones that without even knowing that they're in one of these two test groups.
Yeah, I would bet on it. The other thing that kicks off schizophrenia really bad, when I was working in the state prison in the psychology department, inmates started flooding in who went psychotic on meth. They called meth the devil's drug. Very dangerous drug. And it's flooding into the United States across our borders right now, thanks to the moron that's in the head office right now. It's flooding in. The prisons are being filled up. Those guys were every bit as schizophrenic as the ones who went crazy because of significant mental, physical, and emotional and sexual abuse. The same entities. And they're just as crazy as the ones who went crazy due to abuse or some other reason. Meth is very dangerous.
I don't want to misquote who this was from. It was either from Manly Palmer Hall or some Rosicrucian book that he was commenting on. But there was something in this book that noted that people's addictions to certain drugs or to alcohol or to any vice, that it's actually a demon that has that addiction, and that when somebody, say, like overdoses or dies from it, it basically disassociates itself from that person and then jumps into somebody else, and now they've got the addiction. Or it might find someone that has an addiction on their own and then just like throws fuel on the fire. And and I see you nodding, so I'm wondering, is it just like you say meth has a spike in schizophrenia, and if we're saying ergo there's like meth demons out there, is it that there's like one big meth demon that splinters himself into a bunch of different little ones and everyone's got a piece of the same one? Are there like, or is it just every different demon out there might also be a meth head on top of being a demon? Do you get what I'm saying?
I think they're specific to the drug. Yeah. Now I've heard there's one for marijuana, and I heard they were green in color. And there's alcoholism has their own. That's why they say one drink is too much. And I've read and heard accounts of people going into bars and getting so drunk that these things took over the drinking. Okay, so what they are is dead alcoholics who haven't moved and crossed over, and they can't get drunk in the spiritual form. They have to have a body. So they go hang around the bars and wait till somebody gets drunk enough, and then that person is drinking for both the spirit. They don't call alcohol spirits for nothing, and for themselves. And the first time I realized that was when I was working in the prison. They had a very violent Apache coming down from one of the reservations up northern Arizona. The Apache police couldn't handle this guy. He was so drunk and violent. They were sending him straight into prison. He was coming into my unit. And I heard he was like an evil Indian medicine man. And so I was real curious. And I watched it. He just crashed right through all the normal stop and staging places. He crashed right through Alhambra, where the classification unit was. Boom, 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 and he ended up on my unit. And I called him in and said, "I'm Jerry. I'm the psych for this unit. I'll be watching over you since you're on psych drugs." And you could just feel the hatred just roll off of him. He hated white guys. I mean, he just hated them.
Me too.
And I could just feel it. So, I let him out of there, and I'd call him in once a month. And I was interested in his experiences, and I went to the head of the Indian group. They had a Native American gang there at the prison too. And it was interesting that most of the gangsters left those guys alone. But I went to the head of the Indian group that I got along with great. I said, "What's with this guy?" He said, "You watch out for him. You be very careful with him." So I kept calling him in. And it was probably 6 months before I could actually start having conversations with him. And
how often would you call him in? Like leading up to those 6 months, is this like once a week? Is it once a day?
Once a month, I'd call him in.
Okay, so after seeing him like around half a dozen times,
right? And he saw I wasn't going to give him any grief. I wasn't going to bully him or anything like that. I was just checking up on him. So he started telling me about all the weird stuff he could do, cast spells on people, battles he had with demons, weird stuff, and strange stuff he could do, which I guess is what the head Indian guy was warning me against. And I got the courage up one day to ask him. I said, "Well, if you can do all that stuff, how come you can't stop drinking?" And I thought he was going to explode. I was just bracing myself for an explosion. And he turned and he said, "It's because of the spirits of dead alcoholics." He said, "If I go anywhere near a bar and I'm drunk, they jump me." He said there was a bar in Phoenix that they were piled so high that they disappeared up into the sky. He said if he went anywhere near that place while he had alcohol in him, he said they would jump him and they would try to get him to drink more. His girlfriend was an alcoholic. He said he watched her being led across the highway by these spirits, and she was hit by a vehicle and died.
I've just in your mind, if you walk into the bar and you're this Native American that's describing this to you, and you see a stack of bodies that ascends into the sky, like, do they all jump into the body? Is it just like however many can get in there? Is there a capacity to how many demons you can fit into your body? And is it just like a free for all, or is there like a pecking order? Like, does he get the most powerful demons if there's a lot in the queue? You know what I'm getting at? Like, if there's like a VIP line almost to get into the club, but they can't go in because they're just disembodied entities, so they have to wait for an alcoholic to get near enough so they can experience getting drunk again through them, right? But if there's so many there, like, how does that work?
I don't know. I suspect there's probably a pecking order because some of them are stronger than others. Now, I know with schizophrenics, they can have hundreds of these things associated with them. And the more voices they hear, the less likely they are to ever recover. Some of them hear hundreds.
All different vices, or like potentially 100 like alcohol demons?
Well, what they hear is just the voices. Now
and it's in their own voice, right?
It's in their own voice. Now, the alcohol demons, as far as I know, they don't talk. They just pull. They increase the craving. just like the meth does. There's this abysmal, strong craving, to go use that drug.
So when something horrible happens after someone's used meth or alcohol and they've gone way beyond the typical limit where you don't really have your own, I guess, capacity to yourself, is that the alcohol or the meth demons that are like doing horrific and violent things, or are these new demons that are like, exploiting someone in a weakened state?
Well, what I can tell you is what I've seen is I remember talking to one alcoholic. They call them blackouts, okay, where they don't remember what they did. There's one guy who drove totally drunk out of his mind for like 150 miles. He woke up in another city in his car, and he doesn't even know how he got there. There was another alcoholic who had blood all over the front of his car. He doesn't remember hitting anybody, but he woke up and he sees this blood on his car. Or they attack somebody, they get into a fight with somebody, and they don't even remember it the next day. It's at that point that these alcoholic entities are driving them. Now, with schizophrenia in the prison, the schizophrenics didn't want to take those drugs, and if they belonged to a gang, the gangsters didn't want them to take those drugs either. Matter of fact, the gangsters would take their psychiatric medication away from them. I had one or two inmates who told me that when they get into a fight, it wasn't them fighting. It was the voices fighting through them. And he said they seldom lost a fight. And they get abnormally strong when they get violent. I mean, I've seen stuff that would just blow your mind.
What's the main one? What's the biggest one that you saw? Like superhuman strength, essentially.
In the prison? Well, I got this report from several people I trust, but I didn't actually see it.
Okay,
now,
let's hear it.
They did. This happened in the Florence prison, about 90 miles or so from the prison I was working in. And this was in their maximum security unit. It was like 3 tiers of cells. Okay. And one day the guards come up to this big schizophrenic in a bottom tier. And they said, we're moving you to another cell. And he says, I'm not going anywhere. And they say, cuff up, stick your hands out, cuff up. We're moving you to another cell. He goes, I'm not going. He's big guy. And they said, okay, we're gonna hit you with the pepper spray. He said, yeah, use your pepper spray, you bunch of fairies. And he started mocking them and insulting them. And so they had these quart cans of pepper spray. I don't know if you've ever been around that stuff. It's nasty. It's very nasty.
My dad was a postal worker, so I did play around with like the dog version of pepper spray. So, and I've been in an area where someone sprayed it and it splashed, and it's not fun to be around.
Oh, no, it's not fun to be around.
I actually skipped that day in the military where they're supposed to spray you in the face with it, but I found a way to get out of that.
That's a good thing you did.
I know.
Awful stuff. So he refuses to come out of there, and now you got 3 cells of inmates looking down at this altercation down there between an inmate and the staff. So that's the biggest show in town in that unit. They're all looking down at this. The guards can't lose this. Now what they could have done, which because they were morons also, they could have just shut off his water and not fed him until he agreed to come out of there. They didn't do that. They had the result to force. He would have been out of there in a few days had they done that. So they got the cans of pepper spray. They opened up the hatch. The prisoner put a towel around his head, over his face, and they just drenched him with that stuff. I think they shot in 2 cans of that crap, and he just sat on his bed, just drenched in it. There was so much of it that it affected the guards that shot it in there. Okay? And then when they were done and their canisters were empty, he took the towel off his face, threw it on the floor, and sat down on the bed and started cussing at him. They said they ordered him out again. And he said, come in and get me, you bunch of fairies. Nobody was going to do that at that point. So they said, we're going to go get the shotguns,
Salt pellets?
No, it wasn't salt pellet. It was electricity.
Rubber. Oh, okay. The tasers.
Tasers. Yeah.
So this is 80s, I'm assuming, not 70s?
Yeah, this is
80s, 90s?
probably late 80s. Yeah. So
okay, so now he's getting tased. He's been doused in pepper spray, unaffected. Now he's getting tased.
Yep. So, he's standing up. They open the hatch. They shoot him, and it was a little thin wire with a dart that would go into him. Okay, and the dart would embed itself in him, and then they pull the trigger, and 50,000 volts would go through there. I don't know how many amps, but enough to knock most big prisoners on their butts immediately. Just boom, they're down. I've never seen one not go down. This guy's standing there shaking, and then the thing runs out of charge. So they let it charge up. They get another one, and they shoot him with another one. Okay. So he's got two in him. One is discharging, while the other's charging. They did this 13 times, and the guy's just standing there quivering. He did not go down. Yeah. And then by that time, more guards came in, and the warden was there. The warden finally stopped it, said, "They're going to get me for cruel and unusual punishment. Stop this." The guy would not go down. And so they stopped using the taser thing, and he pulled him out of himself. And they said, "You either come out of there, or we're going to get the dogs." And the prisoners were terrified of the dogs. The dogs were these expensive, European attack dogs that they spent thousands of dollars training them, and they would just rip you to pieces. They were like wolves, once they were sent in, and the prisoners were terrified of those. They were more scared of those than anything else.
But yet this would be less of a cruel and unusual punishment than using a taser.
The tasers. Well, 13 times is a lot of times to be using that taser.
Yeah.
And that's overkill. So they went and got the dogs. They told him again, "You come out of there, we're going to sick the dogs on you." And he goes, "You bunch of sissies, come in and get me." He's cussing at them and insulting them, and what else? So they unlock the door, they get the dog, let the dog in. He's sitting on his bed. Okay? The dog jumps, he puts his arm up in front of him. The dog clamps onto his arm and bites down to the bone. Mm-hmm. And he's gushing blood, and he pulls the dog up to his face, and he's looking the dog in the eye, and he says, "Sit." And the dog sat. It didn't let go of him, but it sat. So it's clamped onto him, and he starts petting this dog that's clamped onto his arm, and he's going, "Nice puppy, nice puppy." And the dog handler and all these guards outside the cell are going, "What the hell is going on in there?" So they had the dog on a long rope. So they pulled the dog out. The dog wouldn't let go of his arm, and he came out with it. And then they beat the crap out of him and cuffed him up, put him in another cell. They get abnormally strong when they get angry. And I never knew where that came from, but I've watched a 150-pound inmate bounce two big prison guards around the inside of a cell like they were popcorn. They get abnormally strong. And I remember once a devil worshiper came onto the unit, and I was curious about him, but I was also leery about him because he had this strange howdy-doody affect to him. It was like that puppet monster movie, that puppet horror show where, there was this what was it? Possessed puppet. He had that kind of affect. I don't remember.
Are we saying like charismatic?
No. It was just this strange affect. It was like that puppet in that horror show.
I'm thinking there was Puppet Master. There's Child's Play. Those are the only ones I'm thinking of.
No, I can't remember the name of it. It's a very strange affect. He wasn't depressed, but he wasn't normal either. It was just a strange affect. So, I pulled him in. I started asking him questions, and I said, "You don't look depressed like other schizophrenics. Are you hearing voices?" He said, "Yeah, I hear voices." I said, "Well, what do they tell you?" "Well, they tell me to do certain stuff." And he wouldn't talk about it. And I said, you have more energy than most schizophrenics. Where do you get that energy? He said, "They give it to me." I said, "What do they give it to you for?" He said, "They give it to me to perform certain tasks." I didn't want to ask him what those were, but they were giving him energy. He told me that he could visit certain cells in the Florence prison 90 miles away. He could visit with inmates in those cells also.
So like we're talking like astral projection almost?
I guess. He was physically locked up, so he wasn't going there.
why would a prisoner decide to astral project into another prison somewhere else? That almost sounds like way too institutionalized.
Well, they got gangs in all these different prisons. So
right, but I mean, if you could astral project, why not go to like Maui or something as opposed to another prison?
Well, you got to keep in mind this guy was a devil worshiper.
True.
Yeah.
We're not starting.
We're not talking about normal people here. Yeah. So
okay. So
they get abnormally strong when they're upset, and that energy comes in from the dark side.
So they get not just power but energy, and I assume that's like stamina. That's how you got schizophrenics that like can stay up for days on some sort of like a bender of some kind. If there's somebody listening right now that's a complete atheist, like they don't believe in going to church, they don't even believe in God, like absolute true atheist agnostic, and they're hearing voices and voices telling them to do bad things. So sort of like the schizophrenic you're talking about, what's your advice to them directly? Like if someone came to you right now and said, I don't believe in religion of any kind, but I'm hearing voices that tell me to do bad things, what do I do about it?
Well, the very first thing they need to understand is that those voices are not who they are. They're coming in from the outside. Okay. Even all the crap you hear in a normal day, all those hundreds of or thousands of thoughts you hear running through your mind on a normal day did not come from you. If they were yours, then who is the one who's listening to them? You're the one listening to them. You are not those thoughts. See, the voices want their victim to believe that those thoughts belong to them. If you believe that, then you're going to start listening to them. You start listening to them, you're going to get in bad trouble.
So let's say that you're able to, well, actually, let me pose this as a question. Can you just simply ignore the voices indefinitely? So that's not a long-term solution. You can't just ignore them.
No. Matter of fact, when I was working at the big state hospital, I was with a psychiatrist and one of my patients one day, and the poor guy said, I'm still hearing the voices. So what happened? The psychiatrist increased his medication. He didn't want more medication, and the psychiatrist said, well, they're just hallucinations. Just ignore them. And I remembered that. So a week later, I called this guy back into my office and I said, you remember me? I was with you with the psychiatrist last week when he told you to ignore your voices. I said, how'd that work for you? He said, it didn't work at all. He said, they got louder and they got more persistent. So I started asking other schizophrenics, what happens when you ignore the voices? Virtually all of them said they get louder, they get more persistent. They will not be ignored. They will make the person miserable. Okay. But now Sherry Sweeney, the co-author of our book, she was hearing voices as a young woman also. She found that they were consummate liars, and I knew that too. They lie constantly. You can't believe anything they say. You can't trust anything they promise. They're devious. They're consummate liars. So she realized that. And what she did was she said, well, they're like a computer program. They're just running this same program over and over again. So she found that if she responded with "that's a lie," when she took in what they said, she considered it, and she found it to be a lie, she would pronounce it a lie. Okay, that wasn't ignoring them, but what it was doing was short-circuiting their influence. Because if the patient knows it's a lie, they're not going to listen to it. They don't listen to it. The voices don't have any influence over them. And probably 98% of what they tell schizophrenics are lies.
So I guess it sounds like step one is to acknowledge that the voices are definitely not your own. It's an external voice coming in. Step
Yes,
two is to acknowledge it by basically neutralizing it. So instead of ignoring it, acknowledge it and then say that's a lie or I disagree or whatever you do to sort of counteract it. What's the next step beyond those?
What I found, now I found this out at the big state hospital too, is they can't stand the 23rd Psalm. It's like burning them with a blowtorch. One patient told me the voices react to the 23rd Psalm like worms thrown onto a hot frying pan.
What's the 23rd Psalm, since I don't have it at the top of my head?
Yeah, that's the one that says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul."
Does this work regardless of language, or would it only work?
No,
So if you could say in English to anybody, even if they don't speak English.
Well, they have to understand what the psalm is saying.
Okay, so they almost have to internalize it by hearing it and then almost like repeating it in their own minds, so that because if you said it to someone that didn't understand it, it would have no effect.
It would have no effect.
So they would have to understand it.
Yeah, they would have to understand it. The Muslims have their own prayers against these entities. They call them the jinn. And they're much more aware of these evil spirits than Christians are. Christians are like, okay, in the Bible, Jesus casting demons out of people, I think occurred 23 times. But you got the Christian churches now like, oh, we don't want to go there. We don't want to go on the negative side. They almost act like this is a 2,000-year-old fairy tale, and that demons aren't around now in this this time of scientific advancement and the age of science. The hell they're not.
That's a great point. Like, how many times did the Bible talk about Jesus flipping over the table with the moneylenders versus how many times did he cast demons out? But everyone knows the moneylender table flip story, right? But almost never does the casting out demons come up in modern. I guess depending on the denomination, but like I was raised Roman Catholic, so I always was taught about like exorcism and demons and people can be possessed by stuff. But yeah, it was always kind of treated as like a horror movie or like a cartoon or a video game and not like a real thing. So I want to lead that into, are we talking the same language if I say possessed or like an exorcism, or is this separate from like these schizophrenic demons?
No, they're pretty much the same thing.
Do you think that works? Would a Roman Catholic exorcism work the same way?
Well, what I wonder about exorcisms is I have no doubt that they can cast these people out. I mean, these demons out. And usually they're, for the most part, they're dead alcoholics and drug addicts and evil spirits who haven't crossed to the other side. Sometimes they come from another planet, very rarely, but they're mostly discarnate entities. And they are taken over by the dark forces, and they're told that they have no light in them, and if they're assigned to destroy a particular person, right? And they're told if they don't do a good job, they will be punished. Okay? They're told if they're discovered, they will be punished. So they tell the schizophrenic not to talk about their voices, not to tell anybody about them. They want them no interference from the outside at all. They want that schizophrenic in his bedroom, listening to the voices, listening to that acid rock crap, watching horror shows, war movies, negative stuff. Now, the first time I noticed something odd was going on with that was in the psychiatric rehab center I worked in when I first got out of graduate school. When the chaplain ran a ice cream social down in the auditorium, none of the schizophrenics on my ward went. They all stayed on the ward, on the dingy ward, instead of going down and dancing and having cake and ice cream with the rest. I saw that once and I said, that's odd. All the schizophrenics are staying on the ward. Second time I saw it, I'm like, here it is again. Third time
And
I
was it
started
just the schizophrenics were the only ones deciding not to go?
just the schizophrenics. Yeah. Third time I saw it, I started asking questions. How come you're not down there with the rest of the guys? Oh, I don't believe in God, or the Bible's a bunch of crap, or I don't like being around preachers, or, and then you look at their nightstand and what's there? It's horror stories and war stories and murder mysteries. It's all negative stuff, that they're reading. Yeah. So it's like they were being driven away from preachers and churches. And then I started asking schizophrenics, what were the voices saying to them? Now that took about 1.5 years to figure out how to talk to them, because there is no positive outcome to schizophrenics talking about their voices to other people. First of all, the voices themselves tell them not to tell anybody about them. Secondly, the voices say, if you tell anybody about us, first of all, they're not going to believe we exist. They're going to think you're crazy. They're going to take you to a psychiatrist. They're going to put you on drugs, and they're going to lock you up. Unfortunately, that's what happens. So there is no real positive incentive for schizophrenics to tell anybody about their drugs. These voices, they lose their friends. Their friends go, well, you're possessed, or you're weird, or you're crazy. We don't want to hang around you. And usually they're not the most joyous people in the world either. They're usually depressed and angry and nasty people. So I started asking them, all the ones on my ward, and I've talked to scores of them, what happens when you go to church? Okay? I found out that if the voices were very weak and they went to church, the voices would shut up. If the voices were of moderate strength, they would start acting up. They got louder. They would block out what the preacher would start saying. They would start mocking the preacher and just interfering with the patient hearing what the preacher had to say. If they were very strong, they would cause pain and such agony that the person would just jump up and run out of the church. Just out of nowhere, just pop up and run out of the church for no apparent reason. So I quickly learned that the voices did not like religion. They didn't like Jesus. They didn't like God. They didn't like the Bible. They didn't like any positive spiritual anything. Right?
And where are you at religious wise at this point? Like as you're observing the schizophrenics avoiding going to the chapel or avoiding the preachers, are you still apathetic to religion, or have you already come around at some point?
Well, I've come around some. I knew there was a God. I knew there was Jesus, but I was far from a Bible thumping religious fanatic. I didn't go to church.
Are you going to church at this point?
Not at a regular basis. But I wasn't adverse to that stuff, but where I was back then in Southern Georgia, it was like, Southern Baptist, fire breathing,
Right.
that wasn't.
Are you pro drug at this point? And I'm assuming we're still talking late 80s, maybe early 90s.
Yeah. Well, that's the only thing I saw. That's the only thing any of us saw that had any effect on these voices. Regular
electroconvulsive therapy, but that was like morally
that was temporary, but that didn't stop them from giving it. At the state hospital, they gave 3,000 of them a year, and a lot of it was driven by not psychiatry, but by attendants. The attendants would tell the psychiatrist, "Hey, this guy's causing us a lot of trouble. We think he needs another shock therapy." So they'd strap that guy down and shock him again. After you get hit with something like that, it's like getting hit in the head with a sledgehammer. You're just wiped out for hours and hours. You don't feel like doing anything. It was a form of control. And so were those psych meds. They didn't cure anything. I never saw a patient cured by those drugs. I've seen them get better, but as soon as they stopped taking them, they went right back to where they were.
Have you ever seen a schizophrenic completely cured?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, a number. So once I found out.
Yeah, go ahead.
Once I found out what these voices were and how they operated, I started, messing around with how to throw wrenches into the patterns that they were running. Right? Now, also what I saw that was odd was here they are teaching in the universities, and I believed this at the time, that schizophrenia and mental illness is caused by a chemical imbalance of the brain. That's what they were pushing in college. That's what they're pushing in graduate school. That's what they were pushing in the PhD program. That's what they were teaching psychiatrists. That was made up by a drug company, Eli Lilly, in the 70s when they came up with Prozac. They needed some reason to tell the public why their drug worked. So they just made it up. Oh, it's a chemical imbalance of the brain. Our antidepressant does something to the chemicals in the brain, so it must be a chemical imbalance of the brain. And they started publishing that. And the universities, the big pharma owns the friggin' universities. They took them over in 1910 with the Flexner Report and Rockefellers. They bought off the entire U.S. Congress and made it illegal to teach anything in universities except pharmacological curriculum. They had to teach about drugs, because they were selling drugs.
This is what dovetails into my research into all this. Is specifically there's one doctor in particular, Dr. Abram Hoffer, who's among many things orthomolecular medicine, which is the concept of fortifying cereals and loading just common foods up with niacin and all sorts of other drugs in order to combat what they would describe as not just vitamin and mineral deficiencies, but chemical imbalances. And one of the studies that caught my eye, and I would love to get your input on what the real thing was going on here. But so Dr. Abram Hoffer said that there was a kid that was coming to see him that had schizophrenia. And again, I guess some of the earliest research into schizophrenia seemed like it was focused on younger people, because when people got older, there was almost like an expectation that they would start to sunset and all these other sort of dumbed down terms, that it was okay, well, that just happens to old people. But when it happened to your progeny or happened to a young person in your family, now it's notable for a number of reasons. It's way more abnormal, and also this might be the person that you're hoping to leave your legacy and your dynasty to. So now it's a much bigger issue than grandpa's seen his best years. So now when this starts coming up, all of these children and young 20-year-olds are kind of the main focus. So that leads into one of these case studies where someone brings their kid to them, and the kid's just constantly tripping, essentially just always hallucinating, hearing voices, everything that you're kind of describing. And they find out by removing apples from the kid's diet, it goes away. And that it had something to do with folic acid, or I can't remember the exact mechanism, but that was the explanation. And this is 100% literally funded by Rockefellers. All this guy's research is Rockefeller
I wouldn't trust
funded.
anything funded by Rockefeller.
But the concept here is that this is one of the examples in this one person's research about the chemical imbalance in the brain. And it goes way deeper into serotonin response, and that the body starts building additional receptors. And in order, if your body for some reason has a chemical imbalance and it's not producing enough serotonin or any other that you want to mention, GABA or whatever, that to compensate, the body creates more receptors so that if there's more free radical serotonin out there, it can grab. So that's all BS.
I think it's all BS garbage to sell drugs. Right now, they're selling worldwide $7.4 billion of antidepressant medications. Antipsychotic medications are in the $7 billion range also. Nobody's getting better. 50,000 Americans, or almost 50,000 Americans, are killing themselves every single year. And most of them are on these antipsychotic drugs or antidepressant drugs. It's that nobody's being cured. We have a more mentally ill society than we've had forever. There's never been more psychologists, more psychiatrists, and more psychiatric drugs on the planet than there is right now. And the mental hospitals are filled to overflowing. The mental health centers are filled to overflowing. The psych hospitals are filled to overflowing. You've got homeless people on the streets who are psychotic. You know, the schizophrenics kill themselves at a rate 3 to 5 times that above the general population. But so do psychiatrists. So the suicide rate of psychiatrists is almost identical to that of schizophrenics. You know, and the mental illness rate is increasing every year. You know, they're not curing anything. That DSM of theirs, that dictionary of mental illnesses, complete work of fiction. It's all made up. There's not one objective test to prove a single one of those diagnoses that they came up with. You know? So it was every single one of those mental illnesses were fabricated by breaking up segments of normal human behavior and pathologizing them. You know, there's no blood tests, there's no lab tests, there's no X-rays, there's no EEGs to validate a single one of them. They're just classes of behavior that a group of psychiatrists have voted to be a mental disorder. Now that came from Dr. Julian Whitaker, who's a psychiatrist. You know, 2/3 of the people who made up these diagnoses are in league with big pharma. You know, and I've heard that their meetings, they have these psychiatric meetings once every 3 years or so. And they said that one guy said it was like going to a tobacco auction. You know, the guy comes in and goes, "Hey, I got a new diagnosis here. It's this," and they describe it. You know, and and then they all vote it in, they vote it out. So if it's too crazy or it doesn't fit, they vote them out. So they're voting these things in, they're voting them out. You know, they started with how many? It was like, I have the statistics somewhere. Here it is. DSM, they started with 106 psychiatric disorders in 1952. 1980, they had 256. You know, now there's over 297, almost 300. Okay, they're making them up as they go. Now, listen to some of these ones they came up with. Mathematics disorder. If you don't like math, if you're not good at math, you're disordered.
What's the cure for that one?
Mathematics disorder.
What's the cure? What drug? What drug can they give you that makes you like math?
There's only one of these that I heard they prescribe a drug for, or they recommended a drug for. You know, but the whole DSM, there's no treatment, there's no cure for any of them. You know, they list them down and they look like a real scientific work of art. You know, it's all these categories and subcategories and numbers, and you open it up and it's like mind-boggling, all these descriptions. But that's all they are, is descriptions. There's no cures. They're just descriptions. They need those descriptions for insurance. If they didn't have the diagnosis, they couldn't charge the insurance companies.
Yeah, they don't know what category to
they don't know what category, you know.
Okay.
So caffeine intoxication disorder is another one. You drink too much coffee, you're caffeine intoxicated and you got a disorder. You know, sibling relational disorder, kids fighting with each other. You know, it's a relational disorder.
Could there be caffeine demons if somebody is addicted to caffeine? Would that constitute like its own demon?
I've never heard of that. I've never heard of people not being able to stop drinking caffeine for some period of time.
Okay, fair point. Well, I guess a similar question, because we're talking about like the pharmaceutical industry, and from my understanding, like meth came from the pharmaceutical industry. It wasn't like some junkie just decided to make a drug at some point. They found this through experimenting with adrenaline, because adrenaline was first synthesized in 1901, I think, and they started realizing how easy it was to tweak it and finding out the composition compared to other things, and that's where meth came onto the scene. But if the pharmaceutical industry invents a new drug like meth, which then becomes incredibly addictive, or if we talk about fentanyl or something, did the medical industry invent a new demon that didn't exist before? Like now that people are getting addicted to meth?
Well, it's not so much see, what the meth does is it opens up your spiritual field. It opens up your protective spiritual field, and the demons that are out there come in. Now, I've heard a number of times that when prisoners who were in there for meth ran out of meth, the voices would tell them where to go and when to be there to get more meth, and some stranger would show up with meth. I've heard that more than once.
I don't want to get too much into my personal past, but I've seen this thing in action. Like people that couldn't find their other shoe for a year, but if they ran out of coke or meth or something, and it was 3 a.m. and they were in a city they'd never been to before, holy hell, are they resourceful and sniffing it out? It is one of the most wild things to see.
Yeah, it's the prisoners called meth the devil's drug. Okay, and they're giving this to kids right now. Amphetamine.
That's where it started. My research indicates that meth kind of started out giving it to kids, specifically children that were having problems showing advancement, and specifically delinquent teens. If you were acting out in school, that was what they started, and that was kind of the origin story of all the ADHD drugs, was basically giving kids in school meth in like the 20s and 30s.
Well, they're still doing it. And now Hitler was a meth junkie. His doctor told him it was what he was getting was some energy shot or something like that. And they were giving it to SS troopers. The German army was using it in massive numbers, so that they could stay in a fight, they could freeze. The meth kept them going, but that they would eventually crash. So before a big battle, they would give them these things. They would hand them out to them. So it's a very dangerous drug. Yeah. So,
I wonder if anyone else has ever weaponized drug, because I know that there's certain drugs that they give fighter pilots in the Air Force that can reliably have somebody stay up for like a 20 to 40 hour mission if they really need to. And I would bet money that it's not meth, it's some sort of like a meth derivative,
some
or
derivative
analog.
Yeah.
What about SSRIs, these serotonergic reuptake inhibitors? My understanding is that meth and coke are essentially like an adrenaline reuptake inhibitor, which causes adrenaline to just stay in your system longer and in higher amounts, and that SSRIs are kind of the similar premise, but for serotonin. How much of that is just Rockefeller brainwashing?
Well, the serotonin stuff is just garbage. It's Rockefeller brainwashing. They proved that
any serotonin at all.
Well, there's no correlation between depression and serotonin reuptake. A lot of these people who kill themselves, those 50,000 people who kill themselves a year, they're on antidepressant medications. A lot of these shooters that mass kill people, they're on antidepressant medications.
And so let's go with one of the shooters.
They even have a suicide rating on these. May increase suicidal ideation. I mean, they even give a warning on it.
They should have. How hot sauce has like a little meter that tells you how hot it is? They should have that on SSRIs. It's like, but so let's say that there's a shooter event and you find out that they've been on SSRIs or whatever. Like, what, in the context of schizophrenia and mental illness being demonic possession, to oversimplify it, I realize that it's more nuanced than saying that like a school shooter is demon possessed. But let's say that in that simplified form, what do SSRIs do in that equation? Did they amplify it? Did they put it off and let the demon just get angry and he comes back with more vengeance? Like, what's actually happening in that scenario?
Well, what SSRIs are supposed to do, they're supposed to block. See, there's a serotonin reuptake. So once the neurotransmitter fires, okay, it's a chemical. So your nervous system is chemical and electrical. All right. So it starts off with a chemical firing, and then it turns to electrical, and then it goes back to chemical again. So these chemicals that set off the nerve firing, one of them they call serotonin. Now, once that is used, the body takes it and destroys it. Okay, brings it, it uptakes it again, and it destroys it. Now, what these SSRIs are supposed to do is block that neurotransmitter from being destroyed. Consequently, it's supposed to fire the nerves more often. But,
So is that actually happening? The fact that it's no longer being reuptaked and remaining as a neurotransmitter out and triggering more, like I guess it's kind of like when you're playing a pinball and you get like multi-ball, and now you got like 5 balls that are going around hitting stuff. That's my understanding of an SSRI.
I haven't talked to anybody who felt that SSRIs or these antidepressants actually got rid of their depression. They were still feeling bad, and then they were feeling the side effects of these antidepressants. Now, the side effects of antipsychotics are even worse. They're very bad. They're awful. Now, these antipsychotic drugs, what they were finding was that patients in state hospitals who'd been taking these antipsychotic drugs for years, when they did the autopsy, their brains were shrunk like walnuts. So the researchers went, hey, the common denominator here is antipsychotic drugs. Right? So they published their research, and the psychiatric mafia and big pharma went nuts. They went, it's not our drugs. It's the schizophrenia that's doing it. The schizophrenia is shrinking their brains. So the researchers went and they started feeding these antipsychotic drugs to monkeys, mice, and rats, and their brains shrunk also. So these antipsychotic drugs are neurologically toxic with long-term use. They destroy the peripheral nervous system. They destroy the central nervous system. And they don't tell these patients anything. They go, oh, well, your mouth will get dry. Your vision might get blurry. You'll feel sluggish for a while, but you'll get used to it. They don't tell them how dangerous these drugs actually are. And then what they did at the state hospital is when they started showing neurological symptoms, where the shaking and the tongue darting and stuff caused by these, the anticholinergic effect of the drugs, they would give them stuff like cogentin that would mask those symptoms, and they would still keep them on those drugs. So they're not feeling the symptoms anymore, but their nervous systems are still being destroyed. So they're destroying.
What's the analog to cogentum? You said, what's the analog to that? Like, is that an SSRI, or like what's the actual?
I don't know what it is. It's a psychiatric drug that kind of the psych patients loved it, because it was an abusable drug. Antipsychotic drugs are not abusable drugs. Nobody wants to take those things. Their side effects are so awful that nobody will voluntarily take them, at all. But the psychiatrists have such a grip on them that they won't let them go, because they're making a fortune on prescribing those things. And the drug companies love it. So they're sending them free samples of all these new antipsychotic drugs. This one has less side effects, but they won't let go of them. You go to Mexico, you can go to Mexico, cross the border, and you can buy these antipsychotic drugs for a small fraction of the price that you can get them here over the counter.
Right.
All right. So it might cost $800 to $1,000 to stay sane on these antipsychotic drugs here if you don't have insurance. Go across the border to the pharmacy in Mexico, they'll sell them to you for $75 for a month's worth. You can go see a psychiatrist if you want. He diagnose you. He can recommend which one to take. So if you do that, you don't have to go back. You just go to the pharmacy and get more when you need them. Not here. Here they're just raking the American public as much as they can. They're just squeezing as much as they can out of them. And unfortunately, it's the people who can least afford it that they're doing this too. So if they don't have insurance, then the government usually ends up paying for their admissions to a emergency room or a psych unit.
I want to ask you this, shifting away from maybe like the pharmacological aspect, but staying in drugs. When someone does LSD or mushrooms or some kind of psychedelic where they are clearly seeing and hallucinating and maybe even hearing voices, like, usually what would be ascribed as like induced schizophrenia temporarily. Is every instance of somebody doing a psychedelic an example of inviting a demon in, or are there like secular explanations for what's happening to somebody, or is it always demons?
Know what? I've never heard of anybody hearing voices or having voices stay who were using psychedelic drugs. Now, I did have a number of prisoners tell me that their voices didn't like them using marijuana because it calmed them down. The voices don't want their victims calmed down. They're parasites. So they feed off of the negative emotional energy that they generate. So they'll put thoughts in people's head that you're no good, you're rotten, you're stupid, this guy's evil, he's going to hurt you. They want to stir up as much trash as possible. And then the schizophrenics, that's one of the things I saw at this big state hospital, is after the voices attacked them, their energy level dropped to almost nothing. So I started experimenting with that there. I had a 1 to 10 form, and I started handing it out to schizophrenics. It said, okay, on a 1 to 10, how much energy did you have before the voices attacked? And how much energy did you have after they attacked? It was statistically significant, the drop in energy they had after the voices attacked. There were some patients that said they could actually feel their energy leaving them while the voices were attacking them. And that was consistent.
When you say voices attacking, is this just them audibly hearing their own voice shouting and doing things, or is this them like succumbing to the voices and making action from what they're telling them to do?
Well, the voices are telling them to do all kinds of rotten stuff that they have to fight against, or they're going to end up in trouble.
Okay.
So it's a constant battle. They're telling them, hurt this guy, fight this guy, insult this guy. That guy's a jerk, or this guard, hit the guard, or it's all kinds of stuff that's going to get them in trouble. And that causes a lot of commotion. That causes a lot of anxiety. That's what they want. They want you paranoid. They don't call it paranoid schizophrenia for nothing. They want you afraid.
It's right in my name.
And if you look at these patterns that the voices run, there are one-to-one correspondence between what's coming over the mainstream media right now. It's the same entity on a macroscopic level. You look at it. I sent you a list of them. Negativity was one of the first ones I saw. These voices are consistently negative. They don't say anything positive. They don't help the person. It's always negative. And if they say anything good, they're either trying to get their trust or they're lying to them. Okay, but they're consistently negative. So what holds them on such a negative trajectory? If they were hallucinations, they would be random, like hallucinations. Hallucinations are positive, they're negative, they're all over the place, they're neutral, they're all over the place. There's no pattern to them. You can't predict them. The psychotic voices are consistently negative. They're always saying negative stuff. They're always telling the person to do negative stuff. They're always trying to hurt the person or get him in trouble. What holds them on such a negative trajectory? Something holds them to keep them from going random, like regular hallucinations. So if they're running patterns, they can't be hallucinations. Psychiatry insists that they're hallucinations. Have they ever done any research on them? No. Have the drug companies ever done any research on the psychotic voices? No. What happened when I did? I got into trouble. I got into trouble for asking patients what the voices were telling them. I ended up in a psychiatrist's office being threatened, ordered not to ask questions about the voices because it was causing the patient to believe that they were real, and it was increasing their hallucination.
So the whole solution is to basically tell them that the voices aren't real, that this is all chemicals.
No, they are real
in your head, and
that's what they're telling.
Yeah, the Rockefeller version.
That's a Rockefeller version. Yeah, they're hallucinations. There's nothing to them. Don't listen to them. If they would even ask the patient, what happens when you don't listen to them? They won't even ask that. They just keep giving out that advice. They don't even know that it doesn't work because they don't check on it. They don't ask the patient, what do these voices tell you? That's one of the first things that I saw when I went to this giant psychiatric hospital. Nobody was curious about what these voices were telling these patients. Nobody was asking them. Here's hundreds and hundreds of staff, not one of them curious about what these voices are telling these people that are upsetting them. And then being prevented from asking these questions on top of that. They were brainwashed in the Rockefeller universities to believe that the voices these people were hearing were hallucinations caused by a chemical imbalance. You won't ever see a psychiatrist give any kind of objective test to any psychotic patient, any schizophrenic patient, to measure what chemicals are out of balance or by how much, ever, because one does not exist. There is no test that measures what the chemical balance of the brain should be or how far out of balance it actually is. It's all a lie. These people are lying to the entire planet. And they're teaching this crap in the universities, and more psychiatrists are coming out believing this crap.
I actually have a psychological test of my own that I wanted to administer to you, if it's okay. And
Sure.
it's called PCP, but don't worry, you're not actually going to do any real PCP unless you've got your own supply. But I don't usually send it to people. But here, I've got a quick little segment. We're going to do this quick.
Hey, conspiracy buffs, I double dare you to take some PCP, the Paranormal Conspiracy Probe. On your marks, get set, and go!
All right, Jerry, you provided a perfect segue to get into this. The premise is that
I'll probably be guilty of all of it, just from the introduction.
This is a 1 to 10 rating, where 1 meaning you give no credit to something, or you can give it a 0, and 10 meaning that you fully believe it. So I'll start out with an example. For example, if I said Bigfoot 1 to 10, where would you be at on that scale?
10.
And angels?
10.
Demons?
10.
Okay, you got the hang of it. So now I want to ask you 1 to 10 that psychedelics can cause demonic possession. 1 to 10.
Say about a 3. I've never heard of it. I'm sure it happens. You can have a bad trip, but I've never seen it have a lasting effect, except with people who were already on the edge. They're already unstable. People who are unstable shouldn't be messing with that stuff.
So if we did a 1 to 10 on Ouija boards, like what's the chance if you used it constantly, what's your risk level 1 to 10?
I'd say 8.
Away from demons and demonic possession and all that, where are you at on flat earth? 1 to 10.
1.
What about the existence of dinosaurs?
10.
Dragons, and I have to specify fire breathing and flying dragons at any point in
fire
history.
Breathing? Well, I believe in dragons, but fire breathing dragons, I would say 1.
Oh, if we kick fire breathing out of there, what does it go to?
Oh, I would say 5 probably.
What about a human being has stepped foot on the moon in the last 100 years?
I don't believe any human being has stepped foot on the moon. I think that was all just all faked in Hollywood. I mean, I've watched the documentaries on the shadows and the set falling down on them while I don't believe they made it to the moon. I think it was all a big movie tactic.
Do you believe it's theoretically possible that a human being could ever set foot on the moon?
Well, I believe there's human beings on the moon right now, but they didn't get there by rockets. Well, you got that. What is it? The secret space program people.
So let me ask 1 to 10 on time travel.
Well, I think it's possible.
Do you think anyone's ever done it yet?
Well, I think so. They have all these people on YouTube who say they've been there. That it's happened to them. There's people that had short trips there and could not find their way back for a while. So I think it's possible.
And then I guess I'll end on astral projection, as we were kind of describing it before. Let's a non-schizophrenic being able to astral project when it's in.
Oh, I give it a 10. You read Robert Monroe's stuff. I mean, he's the chief pioneer in astral projection. It's fascinating stuff.
So, and we're wrapping down here. I know we've got like 5 or 6 minutes left. I want to be mindful of your time. I'm really curious on someone's listening right now. Again, they're an atheist. We've already given some tips. First, acknowledge that the voices aren't yours. The second one is to address it. You're lying. But like, what would be a long-term solution for one of the? Is it just go to church and read the Bible, or is there something beyond that?
No, you got to get on a positive spiritual path and stay there. Now, where the angelic forces came in really strong was the last 10 years where I was doing psych crisis in the major hospitals around Tucson. I mean, people had made suicide attempts that, by all rational reason, they should not have survived. There's no way they should have survived. There's this one lady came in, everything went wrong in her life. I mean, she got divorced, her husband left her, she lost her job, she was about to get kicked out of her apartment, she didn't have any money. I mean, everything was going wrong. So she had a teenage son, and she decided, okay, I don't want to live anymore. So she got drunk and drugged up, and she drove off to the railroad tracks at a small town south of Tucson. She's waiting for the train to come, and she's calling her sister, telling her sister goodbye. Okay? And here comes the train. So she hangs up. Train comes. She drives around those barriers, stops her car right in the middle of the track, and the train just slams into her. Throws the car onto another track. Another train coming along hit her again, and threw her car like 50 yards off the road. It was like a crumpled beer can. She could not get out. She was trapped in there. They had to cut her out. And when she came in, all she had was a black eye. 2 hours after this, she comes into the ER for a psych evaluation, and all she's got is a black eye. And I'm like, how did that happen? So I started asking her. I said, well, what happened when you came to in the car? What happened when you regained consciousness? She said, I was absolutely furious. I did not want to be alive. I did not want to come back here. Then she said she heard a voice said, everything's going to be okay. And she felt this dark, deep feeling of peace just come over her. Just this absolute knowing that everything was going to be okay. They cut her out. 2 hours later, she's in there with me, and I'm, blown away. All she has is a black eye. So I didn't feel she was suicidal after that. So I wrote her up saying, I don't believe she's suicidal any longer. I didn't think psychiatry would go with that. So we do the first evaluation. They usually go with what we say. Okay. And he read it. He talked to her. He let her out. I didn't think. There was another guy. He had a .357 Magnum, all cylinders loaded. Put it to his head, went click. Put it to the ground, bang. Put it to his head, went click. Put it to the ground, bang. He goes, okay, I got it. Stopped the suicide attempts. Another guy put a .45 to his head, pulled the trigger, and it just went click. The next day, he went out to the pistol range with that same round, put it in there, pulled the trigger, and it went off. Okay. There was another guy who he was hearing voices. The voices were telling him to kill himself, and they kind of hypnotize people. They who killed themselves. They kind of put him in a hypnotic trance. So the voices were telling him to get his car, drive out into the desert until he ran out of gas on a back road, and then stop and shoot himself in the desert. So he did that. He ran out of gas. He went out to the desert. He sat down on a rock or something and, cocked his gun, and he was about to put it to his head when this bird starts screaming at him, just absolute screaming at him. He said he never saw a bird like that. And he was raised in the desert. And he took the gun and he shot at it. And when the gun went off, he kind of woke up and he looked at the gun. He goes, what was I going to do? And he realized that he was about to commit suicide, and that's not what he wanted to do. And I asked him, "Did you hit the bird?" And he said, "No, I missed the bird." You know?
Thankfully.
Another guy, he went out, went way out into the woods, nobody around. He put a rope around a tree branch and had a bucket or something, put the rope around his neck, kicked the bucket out from under, and he was actually dangling when a hunter came out of the woods at that exact moment and ran over and cut him down. You know, another guy, he turned on the gases in his apartment. His sister only came to visit him twice a year. He was passed out. Sister came, knocked on the door. He didn't answer. She opened the doors full of gas. She pulled him out of there. You know, proof positive, as far as I'm concerned, that guardian angels and God exist. You know, all of those people should have been dead, and there were hundreds more. They were like lobsters used to be. They used them for dog food. You know, I should have wrote them down, but they were so common. I just went, "Oh well, here's another one."
Yeah, it used to be prison food, and now it's like a delicacy because everyone's interested now. And I'm at the risk of opening up a whole new can of worms at the end of this, but I just want to know if you've got any initial impressions on Scientology in particular, because Scientology I've always understood as being anti-psychiatry, they're anti-psychiatric drugs, and the concept of a thetan is essentially like this electromagnetic ghost thing, I guess, that can attach itself to you that represents your vices, and their whole concept of, say, going clear is basically like eradicating your body of all of these little pilot fish that like latch on and each pull you in these different vice directions. And it almost sounds at least parallel or as an analog to some of the stuff that we've been talking about today. Have you ever even given this thought?
Well, I tried to read that stuff once. I didn't get a good feel for it.
Dianetics?
Yeah. But there is a new psychotherapy out now that's energetic. It's the only one that I've ever seen work. It actually gets rid of psychological problems. You know,
does it have a name?
Yeah, it's called the MACE energy method. It was invented by a brilliant guy who wanted to understand how the mind worked and how to fix psychological problems. He wasn't a psychiatrist. He wasn't a psychologist. He was a ship captain. He drove those big freighters back and forth across the ocean. And he was constantly trying to figure out what the mind is. How does it operate? How do we solve psychological problems? He came up with something called the MACE energy method, or causism. Okay. Now, this method will go into your subconscious. It will grab the trauma and it will dissolve it. And it will do all this in an hour. So decisions that people made, bad decisions about who they were or what they were like, it will get rid of them in an hour. You know. So
there's another, and this is, it's weird because we're talking about like Rockefeller pharmaceutical industry and education, and that they're maybe even like creating a bigger problem and then self-diagnose, like it's the self-perpetuating thing. And there's a concept called psycho-cybernetics. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It's a guy named, I think, Maxwell Maltz. So psycho-cybernetics, my understanding, is this concept of like positive reaffirmations and some of this like packing your own brain.
But it doesn't get rid of the feeling.
Well,
So
good.
Yeah, you can do all the positive affirmations you want. But if you have that feeling stuck in you, that's what's got to go. And that's what Mace found, is that the chief causation is the stuck feeling. So these entities are energetic. You know, the voices are energetic. Mace's therapy is energetic. It's a non-talk therapy. That the therapist doesn't even need to know what the trauma is to help the patient get rid of it. He doesn't need to know.
What's the mechanism here? What, like if you were to go into a therapy session with a Mace therapist, what's happening to you between the time you enter and the time you get back in your car?
Well, you're working in the energetic universe. Okay, so you're going to have your eyes closed. You know, there is no matter. there is no time, there is no space in that universe. That's where the work's done. Okay, so the patient needs to keep their eyes closed. Mace found that the mind doesn't work the way psychiatry and the rest of us think it works. Okay, he said Mace says that the mind, all it does is take pictures of where you put your attention. Okay, that's all it does. It doesn't think, it doesn't reason, it doesn't rationalize. It just takes pictures. But it can also take pictures of concepts and feelings. And once it can do that, you can then dissolve those concepts and feelings. Right? So you make a decision that something bad happened to you when you were a kid, and you make a decision, oh, I'm worthless. You know, in an hour, that can be gone. That decision is out of your universe. It's no longer affecting you. The feeling behind that is gone too. It's gone. Normal psychotherapy can't do that. This is an energetic psychotherapy. So the voices that these schizophrenics are hearing, they're energetic also. There's no time, space, or matter where they're at. They can follow the schizophrenic in a submarine. You know, you can go across the world and the voices are still there. You know, so instead of taking toxic psychiatric drugs, you guys who are on these things, there's a website, www.causisminstitute.com, and that's spelled CAUSISM Institute, INSTITUTE.com. Go there and find yourself a MACE therapist. It would be a whole lot cheaper than buying these psychiatric drugs that are toxic and visiting a psychiatrist who charges you a fortune to just prescribe you drugs that don't work and that are toxic. Yeah.
And a parting question, just because I forgot to ask it earlier, and you just reminded me of it, about that the schizophrenia can follow you on a submarine, for example. And my question was, if there is some sort of like an energetic aspect to them, could you create a Faraday cage of any kind that would prevent this, or the Faraday cage wouldn't work because it's in our material realm?
Yeah, no, that wouldn't work. See, one thing about psychiatry and psychology, they deny the spirit. You know, we're spiritual beings. If our spirit leaves us, the body rots. We're dead. You know, the spirit is energetic. Energy moves from negative to positive. Okay, so if you set things up right, the spirit will absorb that negative energy and turn it to positive energy, and it will return to you. So people who've finished MACE therapy have more energy. They often repeat, I feel lighter, you know, I feel better. And then you ask them, well, go back to that trauma you had. How do you feel about it now? And they go, neutral. I don't have any feelings about it. Well, what about the person who caused that trauma? Neutral. I could care less about that person now. Yeah. So it's that's why it's called the MACE energy method, because it works with energy. You know, your spirit is energy, your thoughts are energy, your feelings are energy, your memory is energy. You know, what runs your body is energy. And we are spirits. It's the spirit that absorbs that stuff. Psychiatry and psychology won't even go there. They won't even look at the spirit because they can't see it, they can't measure it, they can't feel it, they can't do anything with it. So what do they watch? They watch behavior, right? So psychiatry goes, hey, we'll give this person drugs and see if his behavior changes. Okay, you give a psychotic who's all over the place drugs and he calms down and he's like, yeah, well, I'll just sit here and listen to the voices and I won't bother anybody. I'll just be gorked out. Yeah, that's wonderful as far as psychiatric institutions are concerned. They're not causing any problems. It's good for the families. The families don't have to put up with rages and fights and that. They're sedated. You know, so yeah, these antipsychotic drugs are basically tranquilizers. You know, they calm the person down. They don't cure anything, and neither do antidepressant drugs. They don't cure anything. The MACE energy method cures those problems. And if it can't cure schizophrenia, it gets rid of a lot of the trauma that these entities feed off of. Because they feed off of trauma. They will trigger that trauma every chance they get. You know, so if something that reminds the person of a traumatic event that they had in the past, that's triggered right away. Boom, you're off and running. You know, or you run into somebody who traumatized you in the past. boom, attack that guy, or run from him, get away from him. But there's an upset, and that upset
Right.
goes
It's not
time
that
after
that
time.
neutral that you were
No.
talking about before, which is like it's been completely neutral. And it almost makes me think that the people that are like overly profess at how much they love the people that used to hurt them, that almost seems like equally non-neutral. Like that's still holding on to something. If now it's like I pray for the person that victimized me every single night now, would that be just as unhealthy as always being afraid and keeping in mind? Is it better to be neutral, or do you think it would be net positive if you still kept all this in mind but spun it as a positive thing?
See, it's a lot easier. I mean, you can say you forgave the guy, but then you think back on it. Is that feeling still there? If that feeling is still there, you haven't forgiven the guy. It's hard to forgive somebody who mentally tortured you or sexually abused you. And then if other people who remind you of that guy trigger you, it's not gone. You can say you forgave him all you want.
Right.
But if that feeling is still there, I had one lady last week, she goes, "Oh, I did, what do you call those things that you repeat all the time?
Mantras. Yeah, mental loop mantra.
Yeah, or I'm a good person, or just repeat it over and over again.
Right, Stuart Smalley, right? I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like me.
But she said the feeling never left until I worked with her. Then the feeling was gone, and then she was cured. The feeling is what drives thought. It's the feeling that is alive. It's the feeling that's energy. You don't get rid of that feeling. Now psychiatry gets rid of it by drugging your brain, and you're gorked out, and you're like when getting drunk on alcohol. It's like, oh, I don't care anymore. It's a
lot of people describe it as making them feel like zombies, which is like you're just not feeling anything.
Right. Yeah, that doesn't get rid of the feeling. It just masks it. A lot of people turn to alcohol and drugs because of that. It doesn't cure anything. Causism does. So look into it before you start taking the toxic psychiatric drugs that psychiatry is going to prescribe you. You're not going to walk into a psychiatric office and come out without a diagnosis and a prescription for some drugs. I guarantee you. You walk
that's the
in
point
there,
of going usually, right?
Well, you're looking for it, and then they will label you some label, and you look it up, and here's all this horrible stuff, and you go, well, that doesn't all fit me. I mean, maybe this and that does, but what about the rest of it? That and so they're labeling people with destructive labels, with false diagnoses that were made up. There's no test to measure these things.
I think that's very compelling sort of approach. That great, we've got all these categories, we've got all these labels. How would I solve problem X versus problem Y? And it's like, oh, that's not our department. Our department is just making the categories. We just make the labels and put them on.
That's exactly right. And then we'll come up with some kind of drug for them. That's their deal. Yeah, we'll come up with some kind of drug. Like
so
said,
okay, so if we can restate the steps here, it was continue. We're going to say.
Yeah, and remember, 2/3 of those people involved with making up these diagnoses are deep in with big pharma.
So there's a little bit of delay. I didn't mean to step on you there. So I just want to restate to close us out that if you're one of these people that thinks that you might have schizophrenia and you're listening to this and you don't want to go and just get some kind of Rockefeller medicine, you acknowledge the voices, you tell them that they're lying or otherwise neutralize them. And then at the tail end of trying everything that you can, trying to rechannel negative energy into positive energy, but essentially find yourself at MACE therapy. Is that the end of that path?
Well, MACE therapy is one of the most effective things I've seen in my entire career.
Would you start right there? Like if you think that you're schizophrenic, would you just jump right to MACE before you go through all the other steps to save time?
Well, it depends on how bad they are. Anybody who's got it enough to where they have to concentrate. I mean, they have to be able to concentrate. If they're so taken over by the voices that they can't concentrate, MACE isn't going to work for them. You know? So step number one for all cases is they have to realize that those voices are not who they are. Those voices are coming in from the outside. They don't belong to them. They are very real. They're not hallucinations. Right? You know. Number two, that they're liars. They lie about everything. Don't believe anything they say. Virtually 98% of it is lies, and the rest of it is just used for trickery. Okay? So the third part is repeat to them, that's a lie, that's a lie, over and over and over again. Okay? Number three is repeat the 23rd Psalm or Psalm 91. It's like burning them with a blowtorch. You know, everybody's got two guardian angels watching over them. They can't help unless you ask. You have to ask. They can't barge in and like these negative ones and just take over and do whatever they want or tell you to do whatever you want. You have to ask them for help. Ask them. They are not allowed to help unless you ask. Right? If you have enough,
helping your dad fix a car, like you're not allowed to touch anything unless he asks for it.
Right. So past that point, then I would seek out a MACE therapist. Yeah. And
And I want to add a step 5 is to check out Jerry Marzinsky's works and his books and his website. And if you can remind people where to go and what to buy.
Okay, my website is jerrymarzinsky.com. And this will, any of you who are interested in the voices and how we came to the conclusion that these voices are spirits. These are entities. These are thinking, alive, energetic entities. Can look at this book. You can get it off my website, jerrymarzinsky.com, An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower. All right? And it will tell you how we came to these conclusions.
And I just want to open this out there. You don't even have to say yes or no or anything, but if you ever consider taking your book and your research and formatting it into, say, like a comic book or some like very visual format, I'm your guy. Just let me know before you shop it out to anyone else. If you ever think about doing like a comic book version, let me know.
What, that would be good for the kids. If you wanted to do that, I'll be 100% behind you. Let them know ahead of time what's actually going on.
Let's talk a little bit more outside of this, because I've got a specific comic format. I don't know if you've heard of Chick Tracks before. They were also big in like this. So I'll send you an example outside of this, but I love making these because it can take concepts that seem very difficult or abstract, and just like you were saying, the brain operates by taking pictures of things, and once you have a picture of it, you can integrate it, and that's where the actual process starts. So just helping someone take what might sound abstract or surreal and saying like, well, here's an image of it, and now that the brain can actually focus on that and take a picture of that thing. So yeah, let's talk about that. I would be very interested in taking your research.
I would be 100% behind you. I'd support you as much as I could.
Well, that's on a high note. Let's end this on a really high positive note. Jerry, thank you for coming, for letting me pick your brain on all of this. We're absolutely going to keep talking beyond this. I found this beyond fascinating. I've got a million more questions. So, yeah, thanks again for coming, man. I appreciate you.
I have a fella who he was a violent meth addict, who went psychotic and ended up in a high security mental hospital in San Antonio. I'm glad we could bring him on and talk to him if you're interested.
I'd love. That's actually where I was stationed for most of my military career, was in San Antonio. Not that I've got any special connection to it, but I've been in the area, and it has a weird aura to it. And I was on military bases the whole time, so I heard and saw some weird stuff.
Well, if you want, I can ask him if he'd be willing to come on with us. Please,
I would absolutely love to.
Okay, probably be sometime in July, but I'll ask him.
All right. Well, you heard it here, man. This has been kind of groundbreaking for me, just because I didn't know what to expect going into this, and hopefully I asked some good questions. Is there anything that I left on the table that you wish I would have brought up?
Well, I think I stuck in all the stuff I thought was really important. Any questions you want to ask me? Any last questions?
I think we both did a good job, because I think we're both pros, man. Especially you. You did cover everything, and I appreciate you for it. So until next time, tune back in. Hopefully we'll have a third party and we'll get a little bit deeper into this stuff. And maybe in the future, look out for a Jerry Marzinsky Paranoid American comic book.
Like I said, I'll support you 100% because we got to start early.
Ready for a cosmic conspiracy about Stanley Kubrick, moon landings, and the CIA? Go visit nasacomic.com.
nasacomic.com, CIA's biggest con. Stanley Kubrick put us on, that's why we're singing this song. I'm nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com. Oh, nasacomic.com, CIA's biggest con. Stanley Kubrick put us on, that's why we're singing this song. I'm nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com.
Never a Straight Answer is a 40-page comic about Stanley Kubrick directing the Apollo space missions.
Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com.
This is the perfect read for comic, Kubrick, or conspiracy fans of all ages. For more details, visit nasacomic.com.
Paranoid. Yo. I scribble my life away, driven to write the page. Will it enlighten your brain? Give you the flight, my plane, paper the highs ablaze. Somewhat of an amazing feel when it's real to real. You will engage it. Your favorite, of course, the Lord of an arrangement. I gave you the proper results to hit the pavement. If they get emotional, hey, maybe your language, a game, how they playing it well without Lakers. Evade them, whatever the cost, they are the shapeshift. Snakes get decapitated, met is the apex. Execution of flame you out, nuclear bomb distributed at war, rather gruesome for eyes to see. Max them out, then I light my trees. Blow it off in the face, you're despising me for what though? Calculated and rather cutthroat. Paranoid American must be all the blunt smoke for real. Lord, give me a day away, vacate. They wait around to hate whatever they say. Man, it's not in the least bit. We get heavy rotate when the beat hits, so thank us, you're welcome. Fuck the niggas for real, you're welcome. They ain't never had a deal, you're welcome. Man, they lacking appeal, you're welcome. Yet they doing it still, you're welcome.